challenge. This is how I ended my talk last March. But as I was preparing for this talk, I realized that this is also a good place for us to start my talk today, 6 months later, as I think we're still trying to figure out what the new normal means. We need to continue to be resilient in library and information science and iSchool education as our environment and society continues to change in unpredictable ways. When the school leaders that I spoke to 6 months ago reflected on transitioning into a new normal, they identified several interesting trends and ideas, which suggested that they were already thinking ahead to how they would practice resilience in their schools and departments. The school leaders felt that online education is here to stay and that their faculty had gained more confidence that they could teach online effectively. They also felt that accessibility and equity in online education need to be addressed, especially in terms of ensuring that students have technology and internet access that they need. We also need to be sensitive to and address stress and mental health issues, which have increased during the pandemic for students, staff, and faculty. We need to invest in faculty development and expand it in new directions, such as race, racism, racial equity, and culturally sustaining pedagogy. We also need to continue experimenting with new engagement and pedagogy strategies on current digital platforms. And also school leaders need to continue to innovate and evolve more. These changes, which were abruptly brought on by the global pandemic, require students, faculty, and staff to develop and exercise resilient strategies to prepare and adjust to the new normal. Many of the challenges that LIS and iSchools directors identified in March 2021 look similar to the trends that we continue seeing emerge in higher education generally. One thing is clear, it is unlikely that things will return as they were pre-pandemic, and the new normal is likely to be a continuously evolving situation. Based on predictions in the US, we are likely to see declining enrollments in higher education by more than 15% after 2025, particularly for first-time freshmen. The need for universities to explore new business models and support lifelong learners in order to meet the changing needs of students has also become more evident. And remote working during the pandemic changed people's expectations for how and where they are comfortable learning and working, with increased expectations for more flexible options. Employer expectations are also changing, with some employers not requiring degrees for their positions. At the same time, we continue to see increases in micro-credentials and non-degree certifications. So clearly, higher education in general needs to apply resilient strategies to adapt and to prepare for these continuing changes. These institutional changes will trickle down and have implications for LIS iSchool programs as well. So what does this all mean for LIS and iSchool programs and educators, and how do we adapt to these changes and those that are yet to come? ALISE immediately responded to the pandemic and the overnight move to online education in March 2020 by developing COVID-19 resources to assist educators and programs with the dramatic changes in teaching modalities and working from home, providing several webinars early in the pandemic to help educators learn best practices. As an association, we've launched a new 2021-2025 strategic plan and strategic planning dashboard, which operationalizes the plan. We also pivoted quickly last year during the pandemic to make the 2020 annual conference virtual. And we also prepared 2 annual conference budgets this year, one for an in-person and one for a virtual conference, just in case we would have to move to a virtual format again for this 2021, which, as you know, we did have to end up doing. Our conference theme for the 2021 ALISE annual conference, which was just held this week, was Crafting a Resilient Future, Leadership, Education, and Inspiration. My conference co-chairs, Sue Alman and Kim Thompson, and I chose this theme because we felt that it was important for LIS iSchool community to address how library and information science education has already changed and needs to continue changing to ensure relevancy, vibrancy, and sustainability. We had an outstanding opening keynote session that brought together 3 speakers who delivered TED Talk-esque talks to address the 3 areas of resilience noted in the conference title: leadership, education, and inspiration. The breakout sessions also explored many aspects of resiliency, from what it means for inclusive instruction and supporting student success, to what it means for LIS programs as a result of the pandemic, to how resilience could be reframed from self-care to a focus on collective care. The breakout sessions also included important critiques of resilience narratives, especially as applied to individuals such as students, staff members, and faculty. To support the conference theme of resiliency, we developed a resiliency toolkit to expand upon and provide resources and deeper understanding to the conference theme of resilience. ALISE also offered a free webinar to introduce this toolkit. The Resiliency Toolkit was created by 2 San Jose State University iSchool MLIS students, Heather Hillis and Leah Stinson, over summer 2021 under the direction of Sue Wallman, who was one of the conference co-chairs. They created a website with more than 50 resources focused on resilience that were drawn from academic and non-academic titles. The resources addressed resilience for libraries, higher education, institutions, leaders, groups, and individuals. They categorized the resources into 3 themes or domains, and specifically systems, institutional, and peoples. Within each of these 3 themes, the resources were further broken down by method or application into theory, research, and in practice. The website also includes an overview section and additional resources, and I'm going to give you a little peek into all of those parts. The overview identifies resources that offer several definitions of resiliency in a range of settings and communities. As shown here, the infographic pulls out some of the key concepts as discussed in the literature in the toolkit, such as resilience represents a growth mindset and adaptability to change, but it is not about self-reliance or something that one has or does not have. Looking more closely at some of the articles included in this part of the toolkit, it becomes clear that there is no one definitive definition of resilience. The definitions seem to vary based on the context that's being focused on. For example, Meredith Farkas discusses resiliency at the staffing level. She says, resilience narratives paint workers who feel burned out or frustrated as failures who couldn't overcome adversity. She advocates for rejecting narratives in our profession that encourage us to do more with less, and the importance of looking out for the well-being of staff in the workplace. The ALA Center for Future of Libraries defines resilience more at a community level, stating, resilience or resiliency incorporates preparations for and rapid recovery from physical, social, and economic disruptions, including environmental disasters, terrorist attack, or economic collapse. This perspective advocates for preparedness and to better anticipate and adapt to future disruptions and their consequences. Looking specifically at the higher education context, the graphic on this slide defines resilience more at an organizational or institutional system level. In this resilience model, resilience is defined as surviving a crisis like a pandemic, and then it identifies survival strategies for when the crisis comes under control. Nandi et al. Argues that resilience is not about the final test, it's about preparing for the test long before it is faced. The resources in the system section explored resilience at the systemic level in the library, higher education, and corporate systems. I've pulled out a few examples here that are focused specifically on higher education and the information professions to give you a sense of the kinds of resources that are included. For example, one article by Miguel Figueroa discusses the importance of noticing trends across industries and of thinking about which trends might impact their communities so that they can be prepared to address changes and prioritize their responses, enabling them to be more resilient. Ruiz et al. Explored higher education institutions in Spain during COVID-19, focusing on factors affecting the sustainability of the student learning process. They found that blended learning and technology were key factors and argued these factors fostered university education resilience. Blage Ward et al. Shared a collection of narratives on the topic of innovation and resilience for international students and higher education institutions in the UK, offering examples that they found to foster resilience, such as online learning communities and integrating sustainable development goals into educational activities. So as you can see from these examples, there's much that we can learn at the systems level that can be applied to our understanding of higher education and information professions. The resources in the institutional section explore resilience at the institutional level, such as at the level of library branches, university departments, classrooms, and communities. I selected a few examples of resources from this section to share with you as well. Nandi et al. Evaluated the challenges that faced higher education institutions during the COVID-19 pandemic. They recommended an all-inclusive resilience model focused on rebuilding strategies and socio-psychological considerations that can be used to help universities recover and advance after crises. Caruana focused on resilience in global students by looking at cultural experiences, life at the university, and how resilient thinking changed over time. And Storms et al. Examined institutional resilience specifically as it relates to campus master planning for higher education institutions, arguing that it's important for higher education institutions to incorporate resilience as a critical measure in their campus planning strategies. The resources and the institutional section of the Resilience Toolkit provide useful research and best practices that can help higher education and other institutions be more resilient across a diverse set of circumstances. The resources in the People's section focuses on resilience at an individual or small group level, including factors, skills, and leadership qualities. A few highlighted examples in this section include the following. Hilton discusses resilient leadership and identifies personal purpose, optimism, and trust as key characteristics of resilient leadership. Zarati et al. Explored the impact of mindfulness on higher education students' cognitive reappraisal and psychological resilience in the UK. They found that mindfulness helps students cope with increased stressors with more resilience. In a TEDx talk, Rose emphasizes the important role of failure in building resilience, as mistakes bring knowledge and understanding that can build resilience, and also discusses the detrimental role of stress in being resilient. He argues that resilience is something that you can learn and is a teachable skill. These examples highlight some of the various skills and characteristics that can help individuals be more resilient in their learning, in their workplaces, and in their personal lives. A new blog has been started on the topic of resiliency. For example, you can see posts which include the perspectives from the two students who created the Resiliency Toolkit. We are interested in continuing the conversation on this important topic, and I'd like to invite you to submit a blog post on the topic of resiliency to be included as part of this Resiliency Toolkit. So if you're interested, please submit this to Sue Allman at San Jose State University, and I have her email on the next slide, on the last slide. In conclusion, it's clear that in today's world, it is impossible to keep separate silos for work, home, and school, and we need to learn how to be resilient across all environments. While resilience can have negative connotations, such as suggesting that individuals need to do more with less or be superheroes to overcome adverse circumstances, there are other definitions and models of resilience which support the notion of preparing for changing situations and for adapting to changes as they occur. The Resiliency Toolkit was built to support the conversation and the learning that took place this week at the 2021 ALISE annual conference, focused on the conference theme, Crafting a Resilient Future, Leadership, Education, and Inspiration. But it is applicable to many audiences, including LIS iSchool educators, students, researchers, and practitioners. The Resiliency Toolkit can be used to deepen our understanding of resilience, remind us of some of the pitfalls of resilience narratives, and reflect on what resilience means and how it could be applied in LIS iSchools. It offers many resilience strategies across different levels and contexts, which can be considered for teaching and learning, as well as strategies that could be used for leading and managing programs, departments, libraries, and other institutions. And it provides resilience concepts and models which may be useful for applying to your own situation, or for facilitating conversations and discussions, or inspiring future research and inquiry. So I hope that you'll get a chance to take a look at the Resiliency Toolkit, and that you'll find the resources that are included there valuable and help you in terms of understanding the nuances of and the different approaches to resiliency. And I also hope that you'll consider submitting a blog post to share on the site. And I have the information here on the slide. So I'd like to thank you so much for this opportunity, and I'm going to be looking forward to our rest of our conversation today. So thank you. I'd like to now introduce Brian Detler, and he's going to give our second presentation. So welcome, Brian.
Thank you, Sandy, for that wonderful talk and description of what resiliency means to the LIS community. I'm going to just briefly touch on it. I won't belabor the definitions. I think, Sandy, you did a great job. I do want to delve into how I perceive the LIS community to help in this area, particularly with digital literacy training to community members, because I think that's how being prepared and knowing the skill sets and how to use information would be most impactful. And so that's kind of what my own research area is. But I'll end my talk with also talking about ASIST and how it is preparing for the future and trying to be resilient for things to come. Next slide. So that's me. I was introduced before. I also like to give a nod that I'm also a visiting professor at the Edinburgh Napier University, and in addition to being president of ASIST. Next. So just my simple definitions, but more of a layman's term. It's nothing as technical as Sandy provided, but basically, you know, it's what she said, being buoyant and elastic and flexible, the ability to recover quickly from any setback or adversity. Next slide. And I also like always Charles Darwin's spin on this, so that, you know, you don't have to be the best, the strongest, the fastest to be resilient. You just have to be adaptable to change. So I think the emphasis here is on being flexible. Next. So if we look at it from an information science and technology perspective, the ACES perspective, being adaptable and responsive to a quickly changing digital world. So I think there's been many examples over the last decade or so, you know, artificial intelligence, robotics, how it's, you know, disrupting work, disrupting people's jobs. There's things like cryptocurrency that's changing the finance industry. And there's just a myriad of activities and information at our fingertips, and changes in every industry galore. So it's quickly changing. So we need to be resilient to those changes. Next slide. So I think from an LIS profession that we need to be focusing on digital literacy. That is having the set of skills, knowledge, and attitudes to access, create, use, and evaluate digital information. So the information literacy component, also having the skill sets, the digital knowledge of how, or the knowledge how to use digital tools. Next slide. So just more slides of the same. You can pass these on, Sandy. And that's what I just said before. You know, digital literacy, in my view, is that it pertains to two sets of skills: the information literacy skills and the digital technical skills. So what why this is so important, that in order for people to, go back please, in order for people to thrive, community members or individuals, they need to have those skill sets to be successful. So, and that will lead to more positive health outcomes, better access to government services, being better prepared for jobs in the workforce, bridging of the digital divide. So I think this is where the LIS community and research and education can focus in on helping community members gain those skill sets. Next, please. And according to several reports in the literature. The one I like is by the Brookfield Institute. They did identify, especially in Canada, that there's no prescribed method or way for a person in society to gain these skills. There's different pathways, and there's gaps in the way that that knowledge is shared. Next slide. So this is an example from the Brookfield Institute's report about digital literacy skill training in Canada. There's various types of members of societies. There's seniors, there's retirees, youth, professional adults, and they have different paths. Some are more formal and some are less formal. And also Canada does not have a clearly defined information or digital literacy strategy to help people from kindergarten 12 education to more post-secondary and workforce training. Next slide. And also there's disruptions or differences about access to the internet, especially in Canada and far north and rural areas. There's hard or weaker access to the internet. So it's hard for people living in those regions to actually gain the skills that they need to be flexible and resilient to the changes in digital society. Next slide. So this is where I think community-led programs or training offered by libraries, public libraries in particular, can play a lead role. Not only public libraries, but other social service organizations like the Boys and Girls Club or the YWCA, they offer training to community members. And what's so wonderful about these organizations that they're embedded in the community. They have actual branches and touch points where they can actually provide free training or low-cost training to individuals, especially those who are marginalized, seniors, youth facing employment barriers, newcomers to the country. They can actually get those skill sets for free in a setting that they can easily access. So this is where I think the LIS community is playing in that space in terms of educating the community members. So I'm doing several research projects in this area, and here are just some of the questions. Again, they're similar to what Sandy said about identifying factors and that sort of thing, but we want to look at the organizational factors, you know, what funding levels there are, skill sets within by librarians to deliver this training, the user factors, you know, access, anything that they may perceive as a barrier, even the design elements of the programs, the timing, the level of difficulty, the broadness of the training that's involved. So we're looking at all those type of factors across Canada. And next month or next year, in 2020, we're rolling out national surveys across Canada to poll all public libraries to understand both the administrative and user factors affecting this type of training. And again, this all ties into that resilient piece. And my last two sets of slides just deals with how ASIST as an association is responding to this resiliency. Similar to ALISE, we have recently introduced a strong strategic plan. Took about over a year, but it was a lot of work pre that formal development of the plan by the previous board to identify, you know, big ideas. And we've actually, you know, rolled that out working with the community and ASIS memberships to hone in on goals that we feel are important, like growing the association, improving our publications, improving knowledge sharing opportunities, and developing more interactions such as this, the iFederation panel, how all our different information associations can work together to become stronger in order to be more resilient to change. And that's the plans. It's available online. Anyone can really look at it. Next slide. So another important thing that we did to be resilient is that under my year of reign, we've actually decided to invest in the organization by tapping into a large budget reserves to seed fund a whole bunch of new initiatives. So basically, rather than just resting on our laurels and hoping that we'll survive just the way we have over the last 75 years, we're actually trying to launch new journals. For example, Information Matters is one of our new digital products that will be formally announced next month at the ASIS annual meeting. We're resurrecting ARIST, our premier journal from way back, and we're making great headway on that. looking at ideas of starting a research practice institute. We hired a marketing person to run some marketing campaigns. So again, these are all just some of the many ways that the association is trying to invest in its future. And it ties back to the idea of being flexible and resilient and being prepared for changes that will come. And that's all I have to say, Sandy. So
Thank you so much, Brian. That was great. Really appreciate that. I'd like to now turn this over to Michael Seidel.
Okay, thank you very much. One of the leitmotifs of what I'm going to be saying is internationalization and the degree to which actually we operate across the globe. This happens to be a photo I took when I was in Hong Kong at the Research Integrity Conference a couple of years ago. And what I like about the photograph is the degree to which it shows complexity. That's what this is the world we're working in, is one that is really extremely complex, extremely dense. And the fact that a bridge runs across parts of the street, we try to build bridges. So there's a lot of symbolic content in this photograph as well. Next slide, Sandy. That's me, I think. That's my picture. I am a professor at Humboldt-Universität zu Berlin, and the university gets very fussy about our using the German spelling, even German pronunciation, so I will do that. I've been associated with the iSchools for well over 10, maybe 12 to 13 years, and have become the executive director of the organization after having been its chair for some time. The book you see here is a recent book that I did on the measurement of information integrity. I was moderately surprised to discover today that it's also on Google Books, slightly prematurely, I think, though it has been published. And this is another leitmotif that is going to go through here. The integrity of research is, resilience is certainly related to integrity. And if we don't have some ways of dealing with problems such as false data, and we've encountered a lot of false data over this last year or so, especially about COVID, if we don't deal with things like plagiarism or with image manipulation, and those are all strong topics, we're going to slide back. That's not a resilient situation. So one of our focuses, not every iSchool, but a number of iSchools, is looking at how we actually keep information at the highest possible level of quality. And there I am speaking at an exhibition about integrity. Next slide, please. So this is an overview slide. The photograph, and I always try to give credit for the photograph, you can't possibly actually read it, was taken by staff at the Humboldt-Universität library. That's our main library called the Grimm Center, which is architecturally lovely. If you're a librarian, and I was a librarian at one time, it's slightly less convenient, but it is beautiful. People enjoy sitting there. That's just, it's a plus to get people to want to come in, and we offer a lot of space for people to be able to use wireless internet. We also have rooms set up there for doing video conferencing, and being able to offer these kinds of services through our institutions to a broad range of people. Every student in the city can come to this, and actually every person who is registered in the city. These are kinds of initiatives that we need to duplicate elsewhere in order to make sure that our highly interconnected world remains highly interconnected. So what are our main themes here for this talk? Enabling the next generation of information scientists is a big theme. The iSchools are about doctoral education. One of the expectations is that every regular member of the iSchool actually offers doctoral programs. And we have 124 or something like universities as members on all inhabited continents. So there's a very strong push for us to think about the doctoral education issues. And I'm going to talk about some of these specific items, excuse me, in the next slides. The special projects is a real growth area. And I will give you some more details on each of these things. These are initiatives that did not come from the iSchools themselves. They grew from our members and have become iSchool projects because they needed an umbrella organization to help move them forward. And then lastly, I will talk a little bit about our conferences and our attempt to have conferences in all time zones, which is quite a challenge. Next slide, please, Sandy. So we hold both regional and international doctoral seminars. This began, I'm not quite sure when it began. I think it began in Europe, but the Asia group, the major Asia region also has been doing this for a long time. And some of the interesting features here, one of our current pushes is not just to have it be an organization of deans and directors. Those are the formal members. But we want to push down activity and membership, especially involving our doctoral students. And Peter Bath from Sheffield has been the organizer in Europe. Sam Oh has been one of the major organizers in Asia. I'll speak a little bit more about the European part, partly because I don't have enough Asian languages to give you very much detail there. If only I knew better Chinese or Korean or Japanese. Our doctoral students act as moderators. So we organize, we do the infrastructure, we set it up, we provide a platform, but the doctoral students, this is their seminar. This is a chance for them to gain some leadership skills. And that's a part of resilience, is they're learning how to do what we're going to be doing, what we should be doing. And this has been very, very successful. We've had doctoral students from not every country in Europe. We haven't had that many seminars, but we have different countries each time represented and a different speaker from a different country. Students ask questions. The faculty role is not there, but we try to keep our mouths somewhat shut. And I can tell you as a professor, that's hard. But we try to keep our mouths somewhat shut because the doctoral students are really good. We really have learned a lot from them, and they learn from running things. The European doctoral seminars have also been quite international. We've had people from other regions, notably China, come to these. The North Americans have not organized quite the same kind of doctoral seminars, but I think that will be coming relatively shortly. We also we have a grants program. It's not a lot of money, but we've dedicated some portion of our budget to this, and it's partly to help doctoral students who need just a little bit extra money to get incentives for research or to get travel. We leave it fairly open. We don't have lots of requirements about what they can do with the money. And we also make one of the priorities for this to have it be helpful to people who are in less well-developed parts of the world. So we've given out grants. I mean, one recent one went to Canada, not an underdeveloped country by any means, but another went to Vietnam. We want to encourage people who are in other regions to be able to do the kind of work, to have the kind of resources that many of our doctoral students have. So that's one focus. As I say, travel is another. They're small grants. It's a low impact process. You fill out essentially one page with about 350, I think it is, words of description. And then there's another portion talking about the budget. That's very simple grant application. And it's for people who don't do grant applications all the time. It's for people who are getting started. Innovation is something we really care about there, and innovative ideas get a big plus. Next slide, please. So this is actually about a series of projects, and I'm going to have to go fairly quickly because I see time is running out. The Mellon Project, Mellon Foundation has given us money, a very international group, as you can see, Strathclyde, North Carolina, Humboldt, and also Wuhan in China have been doing the research, doing a lot of interviewing of people, gathering data. What we're trying to do is to get a better picture of what the iSchools are, what the priorities are within our own organization. And that was what Mellon saw as a plus. There's going to be a database publicly available when it's done, which will be in just a couple of months. The Information Integrity Academy is new, so know that it doesn't really have a public website yet. This is the result of grants, about 2 million euro worth of grants, if you take it all together, to look at integrity issues, as I was saying earlier, plagiarism, image manipulation, and data falsification. And we have a project going on to create training materials for this. The training is not so much aimed at the college student or even at the doctoral student as it is at people who are making decisions about what is plagiarism, what is an image manipulation, what is false data, so that people have enough experience and enough expertise to make rational decisions. And of course, we also want to encourage doctoral students, junior faculty, professors of all sorts to listen to this as well, because they need to understand where they face risks. You know, if you do X with a quotation, are you going to get in trouble? Paraphrasing is a section that we're working on right now. Paraphrasing is something which, when I was a doctoral student, and you can imagine that was some while ago, close on 50 years ago, my doctoral advisor paraphrased all the time. Today, it's much riskier. That's what we're trying to get students to be able to understand. And COVID policies and resources, this is also absolutely brand new. It started as a collaboration between Tsukuba in Japan and Wuhan in China. University of Illinois has come in with some very interesting ideas about how we can integrate medical information, not just about what, and about COVID medical information, not just about what it is doing and should be, but about some of the misinformation and how we can warn people on that. So new, we don't have a lot of detail. Could you get to the next slide? This is my last slide, and I'm in my last minute. Our conferences, because we cover the world, And time zones are a problem. I keep telling people I want a flatter Earth because we could talk to each other more easily. We have run conferences in multiple time zones since 2020. It was going to be a physical conference. We discovered we couldn't do that. We've been doing virtual ever since. And we've been doing virtual conferences in part because we help the environment, and I hope you all really do care about the environment. There is a serious crisis, and the fewer airplanes that people get into, the better it is for the whole planet. And we can enable doctoral students, junior faculty who don't have a lot of travel money to come to the conferences. So this is not to say that we will never have a physical conference, but we have discovered that there are actually some serious advantages to doing the intellectual work online. And we're developing platforms. We're working with some startup companies that have new platforms to make it possible for people to work well together online and also do some social interaction. The platform, we use the English because it's the primary second language of the world, but this platform also supports Chinese, Spanish, German, other languages. If only we had the ability to switch languages more easily, we wouldn't have to use only one language, English. And I will just throw in a footnote, even though I'm over time. When I was a child, my mother insisted that I learn French because it was the real international language. Canadians will appreciate this, perhaps, but it hasn't stayed at the same level that it once was. Sandy, Brian, thank you so much for your talks. And I think we are now ready to have questions. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much. Yes, it's time for Q&A, and we'd love to hear any questions that you may have. I'm just checking the chat. I don't see anything in there, but feel free to enter in a question into the chat pane. And while you're thinking about your questions, maybe I will kick things off with a question to the panelists. So I spent a lot of time talking about the resiliency toolkit that ALISE developed. I was curious if you had any thoughts or comments about Brian and Michael, how you could envision if there would be some usage that you could see for your association or your association's members in any way.
Well, I'll start. If I may, Brian.
Sure, go ahead.
I think the toolkit is a wonderful thing, and I think it certainly has application to many situations where our members are. And as we all know with the iFederation, our members overlap enormously. So I expect many of our members have actually seen that. One of the problems that we have with toolkits and one of the problems we have with strategic plans is the cultural variation is such that one size doesn't always fit with us. But as a reference, I think these are wonderful.
Excellent. Brian?
Yeah, I just want to add that, resiliency is very important, but it's hard to keep it on the front burner. Like, people forget about it. And when we did our strategic plan, one of the action items that we've taken out of that is at every board meeting, we actually have a dashboard and we look at how we're tracking our success. So the plan needs to be almost systematically embedded in our work processes and of the association to keep it up front. So that's number one, is if we're going to have a toolkit like resiliency toolkit, it has to be in the forefront and be used actively. And also, I think for our strategic plan, that we've learned from this is that it's not a document set in stone that's flexible itself. But if a new idea comes up, we're willing to put it in, but we don't want to add in every new idea. So the same thing with resiliency. That toolkit should be flexible itself in terms of, if there's a new angle or a new direction that that you'd be open to looking at that being flexible too. So those are the
Definitely,
points.
definitely.
But it's hard to, like, this is an important topic, but it's hard to keep it in everyone's mind, like how to react to the world and be resilient and thrive, as you say, when you're just trying to get through the day.
I think that's a really good point. And I mean, from looking at the literature, I mean, I see that preparedness really is a big part of what, in terms of being resilient, is not trying to just be reactive, but have some plans in place. That is hard to live in a constant state of preparedness. And so, but, that it's good. It's good food for thought. And I agree. It's always hard with a toolkit. I think one of the biggest challenges is sustainability. Like, how do you, make sure that it stays current all the time? So I think that's kind of what you were getting at. But certainly for a snapshot in time, I think that this is, there's still a lot of, I'm hoping that we can leverage and learn from this. I know having gone through it pretty thoroughly, I know I learned a lot, really widened my perceptions about resilience, and also at the ALISE conference, just all the different resilience narratives and how some of them are not positive and have negative connotations. I think is important to reflect on, and as well. And so it was interesting exercise. So I want to see if anybody has any questions from the audience, if there would be anything you'd like to comment on or to ask.
If you're still waiting for questions, let me just say that doing these conferences virtually is a form of resilience too. I mean, we had no choice, and we had to invent very quickly how we do this. But it's actually been a success. I think. Well, there are pieces we lose, such as going out to drinks with people, which I certainly enjoy, and that social contact. There are things we gain, and the fact that I could be here from Berlin, Brian from Toronto, Sandy from California, all in our own space, but electronically talking to people from, well, potentially across the world. I think that is an excellent form of resilience.
Yes, I see that I've discovered we do have several questions or comments in the hopper. So let me start going through them. The first is from Brian Anderson, and he says, being flexible in modern times is important to thrive. You all made good points on being resilient, but as far as a challenge I see from university staff members and administrators standpoint is understanding what populations are mostly at risk of lacking digital literacy. Dr. Brian Detler mentioned senior citizens and people in rural communities. Those from low social economic backgrounds tend to suffer the most. So what programs are being used to help those in need is important.
I totally agree. I don't know, there's a question in there, but I appreciate the comment, because that was kind of the message I wanted to portray to this audience, is that, education is a big part, and we need to educate everyone in society, and we can't leave anyone behind. And so this is where I see a role of public libraries and other social service agencies, just meeting that societal need. And it's a really important need that, we working in our own universities have the resources, and not always as much as you would like, but we have the training and staff to help us. Think of people out in the middle of, in North Bay or in the Yukon, or newcomer to Canada, doesn't speak English or French, and needs to ramp up to get a job. Like, how do we, who's going to help them? And I think this is where libraries can be a champion in this space and actually make meaningful differences. But there's challenges of doing that, like how well prepared are public libraries situated? Like the staff themselves need to have that knowledge. Sometimes the knowledge that is needed is very technical. So what I've been seeing here in my own research work is that public libraries are partnering with private technology companies like Cisco Networks, just to get certification to people. So they have the knowledge, but the libraries have the community access, the internet access, the buildings, people that can speak multiple languages, and they can actually get like work with the private sector to deliver such training. That's just one example. There's many examples that we're seeing about innovations in the space, but I think it's a great way to make people who are not as advantaged to be more resilient in the future and to thrive. And that's kind of that's how I'm tying that into this. But thank you for that comment.
Mm-hmm. And I agree with Brian. I think this is a very important area, and many of our public libraries actually do wonderful service in bringing people in, giving them internet access if they don't have it at home. And if I may speak just for Berlin, one of the things that we train our students to do is to be part of bringing people in. I mean, enabling them to enable others to have a better understanding of the digital world. This is, for them, it's easy in some ways. For older people, it's sometimes a bit harder. And we need to do this across the planet to be able to make it make that kind of access available. The trouble is often people don't have good internet, and that is something which we as universities and as members of institutions, we can't directly affect that. We can only tell people how important it is.
And I think the COVID situation has exacerbated this. I'm thinking of seniors and shut-ins who were just locked in their houses, couldn't leave, or they were in retirement homes and didn't have access to family or any. And a lot of them, if they were lucky to have an iPad, could work out something and visit people through Facebook or whatever technologies. But they need the training to get there, right? It's such an important part. Like people need to be digitally competent in today's society just for social, to prevent social isolation, to be part of your family and your community, the mental health reasons alone. And that's just one example, right? So, anyways.
Thank you. We have several more comments or questions. Stephanie Halvalka, she says, Halveka, sorry. In case of image manipulation, will this also include video manipulation such as deep fakes? Is that for you, Michael?
Well, yeah, she's my doctoral, or was my doctoral student. She is finished and has a good job. So I'm very pleased that she was able to join us. And yes, we need to include things like that. A lot of the image work that we have been doing so far has been for medical issues, where there is a slide that has some medical information, or could not be a non-medical, but it often ends up being that because these are people where money is very much involved, and we haven't done as much looking as we should about some of the fakes that are coming up in video world, and yet many of these are very important. We see these in the news. We see sometimes such things in Retraction Watch. I don't know if you all follow Retraction Watch. We don't get as much in the academic world because the deep fakes don't tend to penetrate to us, but it's an absolutely important area. And thank you for the question, Stephanie.
Thank you. We have another question for you, Michael. This is from Lisa Hinchcliffe. She says, I'm interested in the copyright training and how it connects into information integrity. Could you share a bit more about that?
I'm happy to. I did, years back, I did teach copyright courses. And the copyright issues and the plagiarism issues and the integrity issues tend to get mixed together, and that isn't always appropriate. For example, with plagiarism, one would think that copyright was a major factor here, but the copyright laws and the plagiarism rules really diverge very strongly. If you just stuck with what goes through courts, and I'm talking mostly about US courts at this point, in terms of what is legitimate in terms of a copyright violation and what isn't, most things that are plagiarism wouldn't count. Plagiarism goes much more into the ethical side, into how we deal with other people's intellectual properties, rather than to the laws themselves. The images are a much more complex situation because we don't have mechanisms that say, how do we take a part of an image? The copyright laws don't really do a good job on that. There is some legislation, there is some work on this, some judicial decisions, but it is clear, I think, as a non-lawyer, that every time someone is taking a portion of an image and changing it, they are doing something that is ethically troubling. They are also doing something that is changing one of the fundamental data points in research. And that does more damage to us than just copying someone else's sentence without putting the proper reference. So we don't want people to plagiarize by any means. We want to have those references there. Those references are really important to have the context of a work, but damaging, altering an image, altering data, making up data, those are really devastating for our academic purpose. I'm sorry, you get a topic where I could just talk for hours. I won't do it though.
Very good, thank you. We have several other comments and questions, so I'm really pleased to see that. Thank you so much for putting those in. So the next one's from Heidi Julian, and she says, thank you all for your talks. What a wonderful range of ideas to promote resiliency. All three organizations gain tremendously from sharing ideas together. While resiliency is one common concern, what other issues do the iFederation see as common across all three organizations? So what other issues do the iFederation see as common across all three organizations is the question.
Well, I think we did touch base on that in our last meeting that we had our conference call. We talked about the lack of practitioners, particularly in our three organizations. We're thinking about reaching out to other larger associations potentially, but that's another, just, we're all research focused pretty much. And there's that practical nature that could benefit our association if we had a partner that was heavy into the practice.
I think we have also talked about, that we all are concerned about doctoral student education, that's a core element that cuts across all of the three associations. And we have talked about, although I think it's harder in practice, about the voice that the three associations have, or in terms of advocating together, or in terms of sharing a common voice in that regard. It's a little harder to do in practice, but I think that there's something there that could be explored further with regard to, our common interest in seeing the well-being of the information field thriving and being well understood by others. So I think that would be another area I would put forward.
Yeah, since Heidi asked the question, and hello, Heidi, I will throw in one more thing that we haven't been working on lately, but is worth considering, and that is accreditation. Heidi and I were part of a team that accredited an international department of a university recently, and we've done this before together. And accreditation is itself an important issue. These evaluations are important. And the degree to which we as people who care about the quality of information are prepared to accept requests by institutions to do some serious looking at how well they work. And there's a business aspect. Brian, certainly in his role, the libraries are important. We need to be able to take a whole picture. And I think this is something that we could really, and ought really do more with, but it's such a big task that it's hard to take on. It's easier when someone comes to us to say, will you do this? And I think we're all open to that, but to do that systematically, well, maybe my successors will do it.
I mean, I think, and Heidi, as you know, I think we all have an interest in research and advancing the field of our understanding, but it may be with slightly different vantage points. And certainly for ALISE, we're focused on education specifically as our area of focus, but we have all share an interest in advancing knowledge in the field as well. But that's maybe less of an issue as something else. I'd be interested in what the audience thinks as well in terms of ideas of what they see as common concerns. Brian?
That's the purpose of our panel at the ACES annual meeting, is to talk about just this topic about how can the iFederation members better work together and move the field forward. And that's why we wanted a panel session on that, so that we can get members' ideas. So stay tuned, but we can take some ideas here now, but it is an important topic.
It is, and I was waiting for you to say that. Very good. All right, shall we move on? We have a comment or a question from Ram Ting, and she says, and she is our new ALISE president-elect, so that's very exciting. And she says, thanks to all three panelists for your talk on resilience. My question is, what is your vision of the future development of iFederation in terms of deepening the federation connection among the three associations beyond doing a panel at each association's conference? Is there more substantial integrated joint effort among the three associations on efforts of various things like for DEI, crisis management, or data-driven decision making? Great question, Rong. I think this is also ties in to what Brian just said, is part of hopefully the conversation or dialogue that we can have at the ACES conference, iFederation panel, where we'll be talking about those kind of collaborations or synergies or other ways of working together. I don't know, Brian, did you want to say some more?
Those are great ideas. And other things that we could do is just work together on small initiatives. For example, we're at ACES going to be launching this global 24-hour conference. All three associations could be involved. We're going to be launching research summits and institutes. We could publish joint papers like in Information Matters, or like we can actually just the three presidents could get together and have a book chapter or some sort of publication to the public. And these are smaller things that just show that we're working harder together. But it is very difficult, I must admit, right now, the practical nature of doing this, because we're all busy. We have our own associations. And so it takes some planning, but I think maybe as part of the next set of presidents, they just pick some smaller, low-hanging fruit. Like we're going to do a publication together, or we're going to have a doctoral symposium, or and these are smaller ways, I think, just to gain momentum, as opposed to tackling the world and going for accreditation, for example. That's that. I can't even imagine where to start.
Accreditation is probably really a bit beyond us, but there are certainly smaller things. And at the infrastructure level, the three executive directors actually work quite a bit together, especially in these times of COVID. We've been sharing information about travel and restrictions, which for various countries are quite different. And in terms of one of the projects that I was mentioning on the COVID information, we're going to try to do some crowdsourcing, and we really hope to get support from ALISE and ACES to get some of the, especially the information about local policies, even just links to existing websites about them, so that we've got a repository of information that we know we can look back at over time. That's part of resilience too, is having an archive built up so that we don't have to reinvent every time. I will just point out, however, the iSchools don't have a president. We have a chair. And it's perhaps a minor detail, but we're much we have a different kind of social organization within the institution. So the chair really is not a command position so much as someone who works with the members of the executive committee and with the board to come up with policy. But we have a pretty good consensus by and large.
Great. All right, I'll move on to the next one. It's from Valerie Nessett, and she says, will you consider a hybrid model for conferences in the future? I have found them to be so much more accessible. And she adds further that she says, sorry, I should add that the virtual format allows me to attend conferences I would not typically be able or afford to go to.
Well, Brian is doing one right now.
I know, and next month, ACES is a hybrid, and we hope to have a good showing on in both formats, both in person and online. But I think that's the way we're going to go forward from now on, because ACES is really an international association, and we can't expect members from around the world to travel to a region. But we see great benefit in having that face-to-face, because I think something is lost in this virtual world, just the networking and the sharing, and building friendships. It's easier to do in person, and I think people need that social contact. So we're hoping that the face-to-face would always be strong, but we recognize that some people will always have to have a virtual medium. And what COVID has done is actually forced us to do that. Because before, I remember people talking about it, we should offer some sort of online tie-in to a conference. And now this was the catalyst, COVID. So that's one of the positive things of COVID. But yeah, ACES is on board for both formats, hybrid all the way.
Yeah, I have done hybrid meetings. I hate them. I hate them because they are technically really difficult and easily break. So what we will do some hybrid in the future, but it's hybrid in a slightly different way where it's not simultaneous. So we will have a separate meeting, and I'm not going to betray exact plans, but we're thinking about in the future having separate sets of meeting for certain kinds of activities that really do better face-to-face, and for people who have the money to travel, and maintaining the more virtual part for the people who really benefit intellectually but couldn't possibly afford to do the travel. I think hybrid is also one of those areas where the three organizations, we can really share a lot of technology and experience. As ACES people I know from Lydia have been learning, the amount of equipment you've got to have to do, and the amount of staff you have to be standing there to do a hybrid presentation effectively is really expensive. And when we can share some of these resources and of course share the expertise, that's a big plus.
Yeah, and I can comment for ALISE that, I mean, I know this is something we will be discussing at the board level to understand, but certainly the issues that Michael just raised are key considerations. I think that the reality is, I think that we'll need to figure out some sort of a hybrid model going forward is my gut sense, but I'm not speaking, I can't speak on behalf of the board because we haven't had that conversation. So this is my personal point of view, is that we probably have to figure out some sort of a hybrid model, whether it's more like what Michael's talking about or something else. I think that hybrid is currently is the most challenging of all possible models, and often results in it can often not result in great experiences for either the in-person group or the online group, or somebody's disadvantaged in the process. That said, I have seen huge leaps and bounds in technology platform and how learning how to function and interact in virtual conference settings. And just even from our virtual conference platform and technology we had last year for the ALISE conference versus what we had this year, personally, I felt it was a huge advancement and that there was much stronger technology available. And I suspect that there's a lot of investment and activity in identifying how to make hybrid experiences more better as well. So I'm hopeful that that's the case. And but some of the financial implications that Michael talked about are real, and the staffing implications that he talked about are real. So those are challenging for smaller organizations like ALISE to figure out how to juggle and manage all of that. However, we absolutely have to have those conversations and explore those possibilities. So thank you for bringing that question, Valerie. Okay, we have more from, this one's from Ali Shiri. And the question is, given what we have experienced during this pandemic, how do we conceptualize and incorporate resilience as part of information education curriculum and information work in a formalized and sustainable way? That's like the $1 million question. So I'm not sure if any of us have those answers, but I think that that's a great question and something that I'd also love to hear from the audience about ideas that you may have with regard to how to do this. It's also not clear to me, you know, to the extent to which this is or isn't being done currently, you know, by individual instructors in terms of how they're addressing resilience. Maybe they don't call it that, but I feel that there's probably a lot of that happens anyway, even if it's not named in that formal way. But I think that's a great question. I don't know, Brian or Michael, if you have some thoughts on this topic.
Well, it's a very important topic. I know that at McMaster, there's been a lot of learning to deliver education in our schools. I'm sure this is going around for every university, but it's still early days, you know, and how to deliver all this stuff. So this is what I want for my own research area about how to improve digital literacy training to the public. We're trying to spearhead this exact question about knowledge sharing, creating networks. I think that, again, it has to be sort of a hybrid form of some online solutions and then face-to-face context. But even then, it's hard. It needs funding in a stable center. There's all these challenges, just having people having the time to share their knowledge. I know that we at McMaster tried to create informal groups of knowledge sharing about how we taught in our classrooms, and just to spend time on that is a lot. Just, you know, getting through the day, I think, was enough. But great question. More research needed. That's the typical answer to these things.
Yeah, and it's going to vary from place to place. I can also say what we did at Humboldt University in which my school had been doing distance education for 30 years and moved in the last 10 years to much more of a virtual platform and a hybrid platform. And when COVID hit, the university tapped us to train others and to help others because we had the experience and others didn't. The state of Berlin also stole one of our staff members because she was so good at this. And that's good in its way because you know, we're contributing expertise more broadly to the whole of the state. And we can do this among ourselves too. I think, you know, the degree to which we work together, and we talk an enormous amount actually with each other, help each other. But these are all difficult questions, as Brian was saying, and as Sandy was saying, there's not any absolute simple solution that we can pop in place.
Right. And yeah, and I was when I was looking through the toolkit, you know, just to see like, you know, what was there, I wondered, you know, how that could be used to help address, to incorporate some of the concepts or ideas into formal training and for LIS education. And this might be something that ALISE wants to have further conversation about as well, perhaps through a webinar discussion or through some other means. So definitely open to ideas, and if any of you have any, feel free to reach out to me or to any of us, and I'd love to have further conversations on that. We have another question, and this is from Sonda Erdeles, and she says, we heard from all of you that resilience isn't only surviving and keeping a status quo, but also an opportunity to innovate and to turn lemons into lemonade. Are there some specific innovative projects that iFederation members are working on?
Well, Sonda is our chair-elect. Very glad to have you joining us, Sonda. And you know about some of them, but one of them that I was highlighting was actually this COVID data project, which is very new, but which is something where we can all contribute to building resources, intellectual resources that can help all of our schools in the future. Well, I've been talking too much. I'll stop and let someone else answer.
Brian?
Yeah, well, I think ACES is doing a lot of innovative projects. We have an ambitious strategic plan, and we're rolling out new publications. Information Matters. We're going to have a new journal. We've been investing, and we're trying to reach out to associations like ALISE and the iSchools, and hopefully more. That's one of our major tactics, is to partner, and we want to actually partner more with industry. So that's our next. We're talking about that at the annual meeting amongst the board, about how to build stronger industry affiliations, because they have deeper pockets, they have knowledge, and they have, I think, an interest that to train a strong, competent workforce to hire. So it's kind of like, I see some synergies there that we really haven't tapped into before. It was mainly, we're very academic and we study things, but I think going out to industry would be very innovative, can solve some of these information problems.
Yeah, let me just second that, Brian. The couple of million euro that has been driving the information integrity project, that's commercial. That wasn't from a grant from DFG, the equivalent to National Science Foundation. And we really, really need to go for those deep pockets.
And then I would say for ALISE that, we have been very keenly interested in collaborative projects and work across our iFederation colleagues. We have been working on investing in becoming more of a global association. As anybody who is at ALISE knows, that we just passed the membership. It just passed reduced rates for international members from certain countries. So that's a really positive step toward moving toward a more global association as well. And we are working on other kinds of things, like exploring ways to broaden and reimagine our leadership academy so that we can help folks in our field develop the skills and get them on a path toward leadership, whatever that means to them, whether that's leadership in the field or whether that's leadership in as a formal chair or director or program coordinator, that we are working on that and considering that. So we've been working a lot within ALISE to strengthen and grow and attract a set of engage our core members in new and engaging ways. So there's a lot that's been going on, and I know I shared some of it yesterday at our business meeting. So great. I think that might have been the end of the questions or comments that we have. which is great. We had fantastic questions and we only have a couple more minutes anyway. I didn't know if you guys have any final thoughts or things that you would like to share before we wrap up the session.
I'll just come to ACES, sign up, it's next month. We have both virtual and in-person channels, so there you go.
Yeah, and I will just say, I think the issue of our working more closely together on a number of these big issues is important. And we need to make that much more concrete. I mean, at the staff level, infrastructure level, we are already doing this, but involving more members and things like your Leadership Academy, for example, Sandy, that's an excellent thing. We could steal the model. But really, we can integrate these. I mean, this doesn't have to be one association's effort. We can do these sorts of things in multiple associations with a considerable integration. So I think there is a real future for us as an iFederation. There's a lot of new territory we need to cover to do this, but we can do it. I have a reasonable expectation.
I also wanted to remind everybody that not this year, but next year, the ACES and ALISE conferences will be co-located together, hopefully in Pittsburgh, and that we'll be able to meet at that time. And that was an experiment that we had wanted to try, but when COVID hit, so everybody had to regroup and the like. But I think that's another tangible way that we're working to try to have more synergies across the associations. And it got delayed like so many other things did due to COVID, but we're going to hopefully be able to try that next year as well. And I just want to thank everybody for this rich conversation. I really appreciate all the excellent questions and comments that people put into the chat as well. And I want to thank our panelists, Michael Seidel and Brian Detler, for their presentations and for their engagement and for their collegiality as well. And I'm really looking forward to our continued connections in the future. So I want to thank everybody. Oh, go ahead, Brian.
I want to thank you, Sandy, for organizing this panel and keeping Michael and I on track and meeting your deadlines. Well done.
You take the words right out of my mouth, Brian.
Well, okay. You're very welcome.
Thanks a lot.
So anyway, well, thank you everyone.
Have a lovely day for those in North America.
Yes, and have a great weekend. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.